Hello, my name is Rebecca Chung. I am the director of the 21 CSLA State Center, and welcome to this 21 CSLA research webinar on hate speech on social media. This webinar is sponsored by 21 CSLA and UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. Every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. And since our institutional's founding in 1868. And as members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities. As a beginning recognition of this, members of the Berkeley School of Education contribute the Shumi Land Tax, a voluntary financial contribution that non-Indigenous people living on traditional Chochenyo and Ohlone territory make to support the critical work of the Sogorea Te Land Trust. We understand that our ways of recognizing how we and the university have benefited, as reflected in the recent opening of the world's first Ohlone restaurant at UC Berkeley's Hearst Museum of Anthropology, must be increased. If you too have benefited or continue to benefit from the use and occupation of native land, we encourage you to visit nativeland.ca to learn more about the land you occupy and find meaningful ways to support the Indigenous stewards of that land. 21 CSLA is the 21st Century School Leadership Academy dedicated to the professional learning and support of California's educational leaders, teacher, site, and district leaders. We guide our work with an equity statement that reads, "Leaders for Equity transform education to improve access, opportunity, and inclusion for students and adults, especially those who are systemically marginalized and historically underserved, so that they can thrive." And now I introduce you to Professor Jabari Mahiri, the chair of the 21 CSLA Leadership Board, who will introduce our scholars for today.
Thank you, Dr. Chung. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce you to both our research team panelists, as well as our research practitioners panelists who will respond to their work. These amazing scholars have significant biographies in relationship to all of the work that they've done, but we'll only focus on a few sentences in the interest of time. Dr. Christina Christie serves as a professor of education and the dean of the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies. A scholar of program and policy evaluation, Dr. Christie's research focuses on understanding evaluation as a method for facilitating social change. Dr. Ari Amlani is the director of new initiatives at the School of Education and Information Studies. His background is in the philosophy of education, and his research interests are in the areas of the ultimate goals of education and the cultivation of reason in education. Mark Berman serves as the CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety. Under Mark's leadership, this organization has developed a state-of-the-art social media safety curriculum and has taught essential safety skills to hundreds of thousands of students, parents, and educators across the world. We also want to introduce our practitioner panelists. And if we could move to the next slide, we see Dr. Tracy Smith is a lifelong educator who has served in public education as a dual language teacher, site principal, district administrator, and now superintendent for almost 30 years. She has been honored to serve most of those years in Marin County and the last 4 years in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. Her passion lies in serving all students through high expectations, equity, and hope for the future. Olga Venegas has 25 years of experience in public education in California as a teacher, site leader, district administrator. She is a leader who teaches equity through restorative justice practices, inclusion, and the transformation of schools to become a team of students. We also want you to join our conversation in the back channel under Kialo. And of course, the link that you will need to go to is at the bottom of the slide. We are continuing to try the Kialo platform to encourage greater engagement with the topic. If you go to the short link shown on the screen and click on the same link that appears in the Zoom chat box, and click on the plus symbol to take a position on this prompt, and if you already have an account, you can log in at that point. And if not, you can easily create an account. But this Zoom, this back channel will allow for more discussion about the interesting information and ideas that will be presented by our panelists and by our practitioners. So at this time, we'd like to transition right into the research presentation, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Christina Christie.
How many years? Almost 3, and I still have to unmute myself. So thank you, Jabari. Thank you, Rebecca. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Christine Ong, who's on this webinar with us for the work that she's doing on the research project. And I want to welcome you all here. 21 CSLA is really such an important project, and I'm so honored to be a part of it in my capacity as dean here at UCLA. And we're very honored to share our research with you today. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you to all the participants for engaging with us in a conversation about this very important topic and what we believe is really a defining feature of how we need to think about young people and safety. And we had never, this is a brand new challenge for us, not only with thinking about social media as a space where children are at risk for harm, but also because our engagement with it is so different than that from young people. So I can't think of a more important time than now for our educators from all levels to come together and address what has become a single, maybe the single most defining feature of our age: digital social media in all of its various forms. The research project we're going to be talking about today complements other things that we're doing in the School of Education Information Studies here at UCLA. We thought about this from an academic perspective. So we launched an undergraduate minor in information and media literacy a few years ago. It's an opportunity for both our departments of education and information studies to come together in a very important and meaningful way. As a result of that, there's some conversations now at the university level to offer cluster course or perhaps even a general ed course on information and media literacies. So I share this to say that there really is a growing interest in this field, particularly in the higher education level, and rightly so, given the pervasiveness of digital media in our lives, and certainly in our lives of our young people. So our research project, of course, it has to have an acronym, is SMASH, Social Media and the Study of Hate. All research projects raise the question, why this research and why now? Not that long ago, we could confidently say that children were socialized first within the family, then in their neighborhood, and then in later years by the wider community. And it was those interactions in what we would describe as, real geographical neighborhoods that children were raised, where they developed their beliefs, their values, their worldviews. And we all know that that is no longer the case. Neighborhoods now transcend our geographic space, and we've moved into the neighborhood of cyberspace. So consider that for 12-year-olds today, and I say this because I have a 12-year-old, there's never been a time in their lives where they weren't with a smartphone, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and now there's TikTok. A significant portion of our youth interactions with others are in this digital universe. You all know this. We spend a lot of time as educators and as parents contemplating at what point do we intervene? Do we redirect? Do we say to our kids, no more, we need you in this space, not in a virtual space? Let us consider some recent studies. I think it's helpful. Common Sense Media, 62% of teens say they use social media every day. 77% say they watch online videos every day. The top 4 sites among teens: YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. Now, this is where we're going to talk a little bit, just give you an overview of some research that kind of dives into some of the issues related to how the impact of social media is disproportionate on young girls, women, communities of color, and our lower income communities. So Pew Research Center, Teens, Social Media and Technology, done in 2022. Frequency of use, 35% of teens say they're using at least one of those social media sites almost constantly. Black and Latinx teens are more likely than white teens to say that they are almost constantly on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. 54% of teens say it would be hard to give up social media. And with respect to their experiences when they are online, we also have some disturbing findings. Pew Research Center, Teens and Cyberbullying 2022, 46% of teens say they've experienced cyberbullying. And maybe not a surprise to anybody, teen girls are more likely than teen boys to say they've experienced cyberbullying because of their appearance or their gender. Pew Research Center, Teens and Cyberbullying, continue insights. Teens living in lower household incomes are twice as likely than teens living in higher income households to say that they've been physically threatened online. Black and Latinx teens are far more likely than white teens to say online harassment and bullying are a major problem for people their age. There's quite a bit that we know. This helps us contextualize and understand what it is that we know, kind of around frequency, experience, but there is so much that we don't know. We still don't know what's the impact, what's the damage, if you will, from exposure to cyberbullying, hate speech, and the like, whether certain populations are at greater risk from exposure, relationships between social media and related harms. We still don't know. I think we lost our slideshow, but that's okay. We still don't know the impact of school policies on social media related harms and the efficacy of various interventions. And everything that we don't know about social media, and there's so much that we don't know, and you all know this so well, how might we characterize our current milieu, right? So if we look back to Max Weber, and we are, apologies there, we're literally suspended in webs of meaning that we ourselves have created. And the real tragedy, we have not yet an understanding of these meanings. And that absolutely cannot be more true than today. But whereas Weber assumed we knew what significance those webs of meaning had for us, we have not yet to understand the meanings of those new webs have for us, and especially what meanings they have for their youth. So our study on social media and the study of hate, the link with the meanings of our youth that our youth are making of their experience also signals for us that in addition to the quantitative studies, we need qualitative studies, right? We have those data, we understand frequencies of interactions, self-reported experiences online, but we need meaningful qualitative studies to get at these experiences in deep and rich ways. I'm going to turn this over now to Arif, and who's going to continue the presentation.
Thank you so much, Tina. Well, I'll now introduce our study and share some pilot results that we've gained from our study. Our study is part of a larger study called the Initiative to Study Hate at UCLA. And it's a 3-year pilot project that brings together 20 disciplines from across the UCLA campus. Now, our study is a 1-year study in collaboration with the Organization for Social Media Safety. They are a formidable partner for us. So let me turn it over to Mark Berkman, CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety, to give us a brief introduction to the organization and what it does, because it really connects with the mechanism for us and how we are collecting our data. Mark.
Thank you so much, Arif. Thank you, Dean Christie, as well. I'm just going to give you, like Arif said, a very brief introduction of who we are and what we do, so you can better understand how this partnership's working and how it's contributing to this current research initiative. So the Organization for Social Media Safety is the first and leading consumer protection organization focused exclusively on social media. That means we protect against all social media related dangers, from cyberbullying to, of course, our topic today, hate speech, trafficking, depression, suicide. Unfortunately, there's a long list of dangers that we protect against. We are backed by a world-class board of directors and advisory council with leading physicians, psychologists, technologists, and educators, all of which keeps us at the forefront in global expertise on social media safety. Next slide. So we take a comprehensive consumer protection oriented approach to our work. That's our model. That's our theory of change. It's also a fancy way of saying that we have 3 departments working to make social media safer for everyone. First is technology development. So we work on software and apps that provide real-time protection against any and all social media related dangers. Next slide. So we do advocacy work. We work on a nonpartisan basis at all levels of government to enhance public policy around social media safety. I was actually just in DC yesterday for Senate Judiciary Committee hearings on these issues. And of course, we do education work. So we are at K through 12 schools across the country. We teach students, parents, and educators essential social media safety skills. We consult with schools and school districts on social media related policies. We also work and present to businesses across the country. We work extensively with the press to make sure that any stories covering social media related dangers contain correct information and useful tips for viewers. Next slide. So our student presentations across the country are interactive, and this was a really pivotal feature that we added to our presentation several years ago. So each of the students at our presentations gets one of the controllers that you see here, nearly indestructible, sometimes not so much with K through 12 students. but that allows the students to participate as we teach them our social media safety curriculum. We found it substantially increased engagement. The students really enjoy having that opportunity to participate along. It allows us to measure feedback at the end, of course, so we can assess the impact of our presentations. It's also the crux of this research initiative and our partnership with UCLA. And so when we go to schools, we're able to capture 100% of the student participation. We believe it's incredibly reliable, trustworthy data around the social media related dangers that we are teaching on. And so our goal in forming this partnership with UCLA was to be able to make that research usable for the greater public. There is such a dearth of information and understanding when it comes to quickly evolving social media safety issues. This allows us in almost real time as we move across the country to capture this incredibly important data that then feeds back into all the programming that I just talked about as we continue to learn. So we're very grateful for this partnership with UCLA, for Dean Christie, Dr. Amlani, and Dr. On's work with us. We think it's going to have a substantial impact in protecting families across the country.
Great. Thanks. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.
This is our team, and as you can see, it's a multidisciplinary team. Tina is our fearless leader. We also have Professor Ann Gilliland, who is in the Information Studies Department, and Christine Ong, who's actually the lead on this project. And we also have Tyrone Howard as the advisor, and Mark Hansen as our research methodologist and statistician. Our ultimate goals of the study are really to lay a foundation for future studies examining how hate speech on social media may affect youth mental health, learning trajectories, educational achievement. We also aim to monitor trends over time within and across schools, and this is supremely important because of the changing nature of technology and also social media apps. So if we can track it over time, that's even better. But of course, before doing all this, we've got to understand what students make of hate speech, what they consider hate speech to be, their levels of exposure, kinds of exposure, and so on and so forth. So this is our focus in this study. Here are some working definitions that we're working with. Social media, anything we can publicly interact with others digitally, gaming, TikTok, so on and so forth. And hate speech, speech that demeans or harasses on the basis of someone's traits, characteristics like race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or sexual orientation. Our guiding questions for this particular research is, what do youth define as hate speech? How do these definitions overlap with the literature? To what extent do youth report being exposed to hate speech on social media? And what kinds of hate speech are most commonly experienced? How does youth reported exposure to hate speech vary by key variables, such as school type, school demographics, and so on and so forth, and use? And then finally, how does youth exposure to hate speech via social media vary relative to other modes of exposure, e.g. face-to-face? Our methods are both quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative, we analyze the student poll data gathered during the OF-SMS assemblies from grades 5 through 12 from about 40 schools. That's what we have planned this year, and that's across the country as well. And we have about 400 students roughly per student. So here we're looking at a relatively large data set. And then a nod to Max Weber. We also have a qualitative portion where we have focus groups at 4 local schools. And here our biggest question is, how do they experience hate speech? What do they make of it? What do they think? What do they think of it? And how does it resonate with them? All right, now let's go to some questions that we ask. If you can make a guess, perhaps quickly put a number on in the chat. How many hours do students, you think, report being on social media? Wow, well, you're you're actually not wrong. The answer is about 4 to 5, but here's the real kicker. Is because students were checking the max, we had to actually redo our question. Next slide, please. And we had to include other choices. So, for instance, we now have 7 to 8 hours, 9 to 10 hours, and 11 plus. And believe it or not, there are students who actually report 9 to 10 and 11 plus hours. So that says something huge in really in terms of what's going on here. All right, let's have a, oh, by the way, and this data, just to be clear, this data was just prior to our pilot study that was collected by OFSMS just prior to our study, but it was a large data set, about 2,500 students. All right, next. So here's another guess. What percentage of students reported having been exposed to hate speech on social media? Take a guess here. Great. Okay, some of you. Wow. Okay. Yes, it's over 80%. And quite amazing, and we'll see how this it correlates with some other studies as well. Now to some results from our pilot study. We've done a pilot in 3 different schools, grades 5 through 8, and we have data from about 1,000 students. And here are some very preliminary results. Of course, they'll be sharpened as we get more data, but 46% of our students in our pilot report having been cyberbullied. 83% have seen hate speech on social media in the last month. And 60% have observed hate speech on social media directed at somebody they know personally. Before we kind of close out this presentation, if you wouldn't mind, just for our sake, real quickly, if you could give us a hand, indulge us in these 2 questions. Are students able to use smartphones at your school campus during the school day? And are students allowed to use social media apps like Snapchat, TikTok, and Instagram? Great. Some yes, and actually some no. Okay. No way to know. Okay, not at school. Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. And one more. This is supremely important. In just a few words, what might be the biggest challenge related to smartphone use by students at your school? Just a sentence or 2 would be great. And this data would be really useful for us as we conduct our research, further research and further questions. Wireless buds, yeah, okay. Distraction, great. Super. All right. Thank you so much for that. We can go to the next slide. In conclusion, there might be some large questions for all of us. What is the role of a research university in this area? Dean Christie and our team are trying to address that question. What is the role of education in cultivating responsible use of digital media? Perhaps the most important question for all of us. And of course, for you all here, what is the role of school leaders? With that, sorry, I think we have one more. Yes, sorry. With that, we just wanted to thank you for having us here today, and we look forward to the questions and responses and discussions. Thank you so much.
I want to say thank you to our researchers for providing this really comprehensive set of insights into some of the issues that are associated with social media and particularly hate speech on social media. They asked some provocative concluding questions, and perhaps our practitioner perspectives might address some of those questions. And of course, we're going to address those questions in our discussion that follows the practitioners. But I would like to turn it over first to Olga to begin a presentation on a practitioner perspective. Olga?
Well, hello. I'm not sure if I have a perspective, but I do have some background knowledge. Let me give you a little information about our school. We're a little school in Sonoma, about 280 students. Our district is 5 schools, so we're pretty small. But one of the things that I do know is that this social media totally affects our schools on a day-to-day basis. I believe that because after COVID, we have come back to a place where we have to have personal relationships with each other. Some of our kids find it difficult to not be on their computer. We ask them to be on their computer in Zoom classes for over a year and a half. And so therefore getting them off of it proves a little difficult. But it also shows us that their preferred mode of communication, right? So are they listening? Are they not listening? I believe that some of our kids do seek each other out on social media, even though we are one of those schools that we don't have allow cell phones during school hours, before school and after school, of course, but during school hours, we do not. And so for them to be able to communicate with one another, as you could probably imagine, that leads into it happening in the evening time, but then spilling over to the school time as they have conversations about what was said about them, what someone has said or posted about them, the rumors that are started, as the data well states, and then also how do they interact or how do they repair some of the infractions, I dare say, or hurt that happens over social media, whether it's texting or on Snapchat, Instagram, whatever it is, their mode of preference where they've made their groupings, right, and invited their friends to join them. For us, more importantly, more than anything, is that for our kids to report, for them to be able to tell us. So I believe that it's our, obviously our relationships with our students, that they feel comfortable with the adults on campus, letting us know that something is happening, and then for us to believe them and take it into consideration and then support them in doing what we have at our school as restorative practices. And so how does that work in order to help a relationship, whether it's in person or online, how that works, and what are the best choices for them. I know that through our Youth True survey data, which is what we use in order to survey our kids and get their school voices, some of this is also happening to them, but they're not reporting it. So for me, it's super essential to know that our staff are willing and able and wanting to have personal relationships with all of our students in order to be able to make sure that they have a trusted adult on campus that they can come to and talk to about, and then make sure that their voice is being heard and that everything is being repaired. So that's what I have so far.
Wonderful, and we appreciate those contributions. Dr. Smith, can you take us from there in terms of your perspective? And also, as you can see in the chat, please, those of you who are in the audience, present any questions that you have for our panelists in the chat, which we'll come to right after Dr. Smith makes her practitioner presentation. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. And I also come from Santa Rosa, where I work, and we have 7 elementary schools and 1 middle school. And I would just add, I'm surprised it didn't come up in your research, but it's a really big app or social media piece is the Discord. And it's often used in gaming. So the students are doing tons of gaming and socializing that way. And sometimes it definitely gets off kilter in terms of, how they treat each other and the competition. I think that everything that Olga is absolutely the same for us. And what we see is that disconnect between students at a much younger age. Like many times, like people were exposed to computers when they were starting in 6th grade, right? And now we have 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders now who've been exposed this whole time. Parents were not equipped to support their learning on how to use those best and how to use filters, et cetera. So these young brains were exposed to really high-end content or mature content that was over their heads. And so then they come into social media and they're trying out those things that they've seen, they're modeling after that, and it's not landing well necessarily once they've come back to school, and they're trying to figure out like, well, why are you mad at me? Why are you upset with me? Why did you take that way when it was really something that they have no idea. Separating reality from the virtual world has been what we spent our time doing. So in our district last year, we really concentrated on our 6th graders, and we went and interviewed them. We asked them and took surveys. What do they use? Why do they use it? What's their favorite app? What have they experienced? We definitely found some stranger danger things happening where they were they were getting messages from people that they didn't know. And so we were working on trying to keep them safe and reminding parents about all those pieces to, control what their students are doing and to know what their students are doing. So we learned from that information to kind of design, we worked with Common Sense Media and did similar assemblies with our 4th, 5th, and 6th graders from last year. And then this year we're using the movie Like from Impactful. And it was actually came out even before the pandemic, but it's just that why social media becomes so addictive. And we have our counselors sharing parts of the video and talking and having discussions in our classrooms with the kids to help start to separate the two pieces of their world. And then there's a whole other piece, which I know Olga's doing too, which is about kindness, right? And what that looks like, how when you say somebody's name, when you smile, when you give them a compliment, when it's in person and you see those pieces and how good that feels, and how to interact in a different way, because those pieces were kind of lost after that 1.5 years of not having those social interactions. So I think that kind of in that, from the district level, some things we've done.
Thank you so much. We want to remind our participants about Kialo in terms of also another space for engaging in questions. But we also want to open the chat for questions, and interesting conversations that have already been occurring in the chat give us an opportunity for our entire panelists of researchers to respond, not just the researchers, but also our practitioners. And I will just sort of be the, traffic person directing some of the questions. I see one question that I'll just begin with, and people can just self-nominate to jump in and begin to address them from our panelists. How might the pandemic shutdown have impacted social media use among young people? What is the long-term impact of social distancing?
I'm happy to jump in there. We've seen an increase in our own data, which again, I would caveat is not nationally representative, but in the schools that we've worked with across the country, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we've seen an increase in a range of dangers from cyberbullying. Obviously, time of use exploded during the pandemic. Those numbers have not come back down a touch, but they are still significantly elevated in what we're seeing. The research that I would still categorize as preliminary is also showing similar concerns. Some early studies on cyberbullying kind of in the middle of the pandemic and immediately post-pandemic showed significant elevation of rates, even 70% increase. So we are tremendously concerned about the ongoing impact on students as it relates to social media involved in facilitated harms.
I can add to that if you'd like.
Sure.
One of the things that we see on campus is our students have missed a good portion of our social emotional learning. That's what happens when you're in the classroom with your classmates in a group, at recess, at lunch, and all those social things that we do person to person, right? And so as we come back on campus, one of the things that's missing is a reteach of what that looks like. What does it look like to play on the playground? What does it look like when you lose a soccer game for a 10-minute recess and then all of a sudden there's a fight and they're third graders, right? What does that happen? Why does that happen? It happens because we haven't had the opportunity to have social emotional learning. So we have to do things differently and compensate for that. Yes, it is our responsibility. I think one of the questions on there was, what is it the responsibility of our leadership? And I would say, absolutely. If this is affecting the way the students are acting at recess and at lunch or with one another, then of course I want to know, where is that coming from? Is it just from not getting enough sleep because they stayed up watching YouTube, or if it's because there's been some interaction between a couple of students, or is it because they really don't know how to be friends or need to be taught how to be friends? And if we don't take care of the core, then it really makes it difficult for them to feel like they've been heard, right? Their voice has been heard, and that their justice is served. They want to be heard. They want to say it's not fair. What is fair? To hear people out, to hear each side's story and be able to repair whatever that was. So I think that you can see that every day, all day, in every classroom.
I see a lot of head nodding also in terms of additional comments, but I'd like to move forward and get to as many questions as we can. And Olivia has asked an interesting question that's two parts. And I think the first part might be directed to our researchers and the second part to our practitioners. And the first part is, are there any learnings from the research about how young people process online hate related to identity and race and racism? And then the practitioners can also be thinking about the second part. Are there spaces for young people to have conversations around those topics at school? So would one of our researchers want to jump in on part one?
Mark, go ahead.
I'll defer to you up front. I had some thoughts, but I'll.
Christine also put a comment in the chat that I think
I was
addresses
just
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Christine, go ahead.
Yep.
Sure. I'll start and then Mark, please add on. So within the clicker questions, there are some questions that try to get at a little bit more about the types of hate speech they might encounter. But that's where the qualitative work, those focus groups, are really going to come in to understand a bit more about, well, what does that look like, or what does it mean to you? Whether it's, what is that hate speech? How would you define it in your own words? And sharing some of those experiences. Mark?
I would add two thoughts on that question. First, as we've talked about internally as we're doing this research, this really is a foundational effort. There's so many questions that we need to ask to better protect students. This is one of them. We have another question we're asking about specifically about how students are reacting to get at how they're processing hate speech when they come across it. We're really early, so I don't want to kind of give any results yet, but I'll say that I am personally finding the preliminary findings very interesting in a way that I think we can craft some interventions down the road once we kind of solidify the learning here.
Tina, would you like to add anything, or before we move to the practitioners?
I just want to say too, I think we also need to be mindful of, it's who's the recipient, but then also who is being accused of hateful content and so on and so forth, and that we're not replicating some of what we see in other disciplinary spaces where we see a real overrepresentation of identification with our students of color, and that we're not misinterpreting some interactions as adults. So I think it's what's the student's experience, but also we have to really understand the interactions and what takes place in the context of those interactions. And that's why the piece about the qualitative work is so important. We know kids they're telling us what their experience is, and that matters oh so much, but we can't then be very quick to then turn around and say, okay, now you're the perpetrator here, and we need to understand what's happening in the context of that child when they're sending those messages, and who they are, and just to be really thoughtful and careful about who's sort of getting blamed for being the perpetrators or the aggressors in these contexts.
Right. And that's why the second part of this question is so important too. Are there spaces for young people to have conversations around those topics at schools? And how do they have those conversations without extending the trauma, without increasing the hurt?
And I think we're struggling with that in the context of higher education, right? And so,
Right.
how do we model what it means to have, a discussion with our colleagues? I mean, it's like what Olga was saying, students, they miss that. Young people miss that, and whatever the miss was, they missed it. And so we have to always remind ourselves, and I loved what Dr. Smith said about kindness, right? Starting from a place of kindness and saying there are ways that we can talk to each other. That's a skill, and we can teach that skill.
So Tracy and Olga, have any inroads been made in terms of how these conversations can take place on sites? How do we, what skills are needed and how do we teach them? I know this is putting a lot on you guys, but just tell us if anything is happening so far in your domains.
I think Olga has a lot of conversations every day. She's I can tell, very hands-on principal and understands her kids and where they're coming from, which is really what's important here, right? Those connections, safe connections for kids on campuses. And so we have counselors, we have student advocates, we have our principals, we have the teachers themselves, and we've been working to provide them with sentence frames and different ways of setting up your conversation so you can get to the learning that needs to happen, which is, I think, what Tina was talking about in terms of getting at, like, this isn't a blame everybody, the world's falling apart, you're in trouble, get suspended, you threaten, right? That's not going to help the situation, right? What the situation is, this is a learning opportunity, and we need to recognize that these students have been harmed and being harmed, and that's part of what we need to do to help them. The connection between what happens at home and what happens at school are totally interrelated. And so I would, it doesn't feel right to not let that happen and just say, well, it happened at home, so I don't have to deal with it, because it's happening. It's present every day in school for the kids.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I'm also aware of the time. Let's take a little bit of a focus on the second half of the title of our conversation relative to what do leaders do in this regard. And one question came in that addresses that. How do we help school leaders and other educators at large understand how to respond to hate speech and social media? And I'll just throw that question out to anyone who wants to jump in first on that.
One of the things that we've done as our school is that we really are, our district has an equity focus, and it really is about hearing all student voices and making sure that everyone is heard. As you can probably imagine, some of us don't feel as comfortable having these conversations with students as others, but I think it's up to us as educators and learners to be able to learn how to have those difficult conversations with students in a very, I would say, inclusive way, right? There is no blaming of one or the other. We've learned that somewhere, and this is what it's doing, the harm that's doing to others. So how do we repair that? It can be as simple as that. We have community circles at our school that we do every day in the morning, and some teachers do it after recess and after lunch, which is usually when some of the situations occur, so they can have those conversations about why and the importance of teaching of what the labels are, what they've said, what's been said, why it hurts, and why, teaching about where it comes from, right? And why we don't say that, because it's offensive to that person. So when you individualize it and really talk about the relationships they have with one another, they don't want to hurt each other, right? They are friends. So whether it's a negative or hate speech about the way they look, their body shaming, whatever it is something that you deal with in the moment as a class to be able to move forward. And this takes, like I said, lots of PD, lots of wonderful conversations, hard conversations, and then also lots of teamwork, teachers coming to each other or coming to me or coming to one another to talk about, hey, I heard this. How do I do that? What do I say? This is what I said. What can I do next? And kind of leaning into that discomfort and being able to put it out there for the students. Like, yes, they might make me uncomfortable, but I'm going to go ahead and go out there and be able to support the student that's in my classroom because they're the ones that are feeling the hurt and the shame and the put down. We also have student voices, which is we interview our students. We've interviewed many of our students about race specifically and how that has contributed to their experience at school. And boy, let me tell you, it's really enriching to see that only because you're like, wow, maybe my practice needs to change. Maybe our practice needs to change in order for us to be able to make sure that we see it from others' perspectives, especially our students.
Thank you. Other insights?
Part of what I loved everything about that answer. So thank you for that work going on in your school, Olga. Part of what we focus on when we come to schools is teaching students, parents, and educators what these dangers actually look like when they come across social media. And so a lot of students will tell you cyberbullying equals bad, hate speech equals bad. The problem is that what they're seeing on social media or some of their behaviors, they're not necessarily associating with those words, even though when you look at the cases and we study them, those are harmful, those are cyberbullying, that is hate speech. And so teaching them what it looks like in the world that they're living in 5+ hours a day is incredibly important, we found, and that needs to be updated. And we do that almost on a weekly basis because these are evolving, moving targets here. And once we teach that, when they see something on social media, what are they supposed to do? What are their family's expectations? What's the school community's expectations? What are they supposed to do in the world of social media? We teach things like blocking and reporting and doing that automatically, because a big issue that we see here is that students have become normalized to the hate. We saw that 80+% figure of hate speech, 5+ hours a day. They're seeing this regularly, they're seeing it frequently. It's become normal to them. So how do we break that cycle and potentially lessen that harm down the road? The last piece I'll add here that we work on, and certainly any school could do with or without us, or district could do with or without us, is set up what we call community guidelines around social media use. And so particularly in the public school realm, these are voluntary, but what we're seeing is adoption of social media far too early than it is safe for, especially with those hate speech numbers in the context of this conversation. And so getting families in the community all on the same page in terms of age of entry, so parents don't have to face this horrible trade-off of, my child's going to use social media, so they're included socially. This is how kids are communicating, developing their relationships, or they're not going to be on, suffer that social detriment, but I'm going to maximize safety. And that's an impossible choice for parents. And so really a community approach is a really needed intervention here when we're talking about all this.
Mark, you added so much, and we're also going to allow that to be your closing comment and move around to the other panelists. And in the interest of our time and closing on time, can we get a closing comment from each of our panelists too, in conjunction with building on or expanding what Mark has already shared?
Sure, I'll go. I think that all of these data just reinforce the need for research at the higher education level and research in so many different areas. And we hope that we can contribute towards that research, and that research can then inform practice in whatever ways that we can.
I'll just add to what Arif is saying in saying that our most important partners in this research, Mark would agree with this 100%, as would Christine, are educators. And our discussions with educators and those who are engaged on a day-to-day basis with young people and in this space are just so critical to us understanding all of the aspects of the impact that social media has on young people, and particularly when it relates to the negative impact of social media on young people.
Great. Tracy, is there a closing comment from you?
I just echo the whole piece about the partnerships as a community, that we have to tackle it together. And I'm really interested in seeing what you've discovered about how to get parents to engage with us, be partners.
Olga, and then Christine.
I love community. I think that community is the only way that we're going to be able to combat any of the issues. I don't see them going away anytime soon. All I see is us coming together as a team of teachers, a team of students, a team of families and community to be able to tackle this together. So it's exciting working for our district, which is our mission and vision. So I'm looking forward to what comes next to get the support that our kids need for them.
Thank you. And Christine, can you close out our closing comments?
Oh, what a responsibility. I guess what I just want to say is that if you open up a newspaper, you will see articles about social media and youth. Yesterday, the CCC released a study around the teen risk survey. And just it's such an important area to focus on now, especially as a mother of a teen girl. It matters. It's really important. And I really appreciated having all of these ideas and input, and community with student, parent, educator, researcher voices, everyone coming together is essential.
Thank you so much. And we're going to drop a link into the chat that gives additional resources around these issues, and also then want to go ahead and say thank you to all of our presenters. You've added so much, and you can see this discussion is just beginning. It's such an amazing topic. I want to turn it over to my colleague Rebecca, because she will give us some additional considerations for things that we need to do as an audience that we have here. Rebecca, thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you again to the researchers, and just count on us to invite you to come back for part 2 after you've completed more of your research, so that we can hear about some of your findings as you pursue your projects. In the chat, we've dropped a feedback form for our participants so that we can improve our offerings, and also resources, and also archived webinars that we've conducted. As I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, 21 CSLA is dedicated to the professional learning of educational leaders. We have several upcoming professional learning offerings that may be of interest to you, including a series on inquiry and why inquiry is so important in instruction, called Inquiry Why Now, as well as a series of professional learning on the implementation of universal transitional kindergarten. Maybe we need to include something in there about media and social media. We can start with the parents of 4-year-olds. This is what I was thinking during our presentation today. And finally, we also dropped a link for our newsletter. Please sign up if you're interested in hearing about some of our professional learning offerings, as well as these webinars. Our job is to serve our teacher, site, and district leaders, and we do that in partnership with you. Thanks again for your time. Thank you for being here, and thanks again to our researchers. Have a great night.